All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me tonight for the learning of Parashat Shavua, Parashat Emor. Got a lot of things to talk about tonight, and I really appreciate you joining me. Tonight's shiur has been sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Ariel Saidian, Leilui Nishmat Shmuel Ben Chizkia. May his neshama go higher and higher in Gan Eden. May he be a melitz yosher for the family and for the community and all of Klal Yisrael. We're actually going to talk about Melitze Yosher tonight, Hashem. Hopefully, we get to it. Let's begin. Parashat starts off with the pasuk Emor el Kohanim. Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu that he has a mitzvah to tell Aaron and the sons of Aaron, right? Lenefesh lo yitama be'amav, that a kohen is not allowed to become impure. Emor el Kohanim b'nei Aaron, tell the Kohanim, the sons of Aaron. Hashem tells Moshe, tell the Kohanim, sons of Aaron, then you shall tell them, lenefesh lo yitama be'amav, that none of them should become impure to a dead body. Okay. The Midrash asks a question. As we know, everything in the Torah is positioned a certain way for a reason. And over here, the Midrash tells us that there is a reason for why the Torah talks about this concept directly after having spoken about what it spoke about at the end of last week's parasha. And I'll read to you that last line over there. It says in the parasha, in last week, the last line over there, it says, Ve'ish o isha, a man or a woman, ki yihyeh bahem, ov o yid'oni, if there will be amongst them an ov or a yid'oni. These are different types of people that communicate with the dead. They try to bring back the spirit of the dead back to life. Okay, not back to life, but they try to communicate with the dead soul through different methods. Motu matu, these people shall die. Ba'even yirgumotam, they shall stone them. Demehem bam, their blood is upon themselves. Okay, so the question that the Midrash is asking, this is the Midrash Rabbah, Vayikra Chafvav Zayin. So it's 26:7 if you want to look it up. Midrash Rabbah. It's a big piece. And it asks this question. It says, why is it that the Torah is talking about this subject, which it ends off last week's parasha? We're talking about how we're not allowed to do these kinds of things, to communicate with the dead through the method of Ov or Yid'oni. The Mishnah in Masechet Sanhedrin talks about how they would do it. They would take some type of bird, and they would take the bird and either eat it, put it in their mouth, or put it under their armpit, or all kinds of different things that they would do in order to communicate with the dead. And the question is, what does that have to do with the immediately following pasuk that says that Hashem tells Moshe to tell Aaron, to tell the sons of Aaron that they are not allowed to become impure to a dead body? What is the connection between one and the other? So over here, the Midrash goes on to explain something very interesting. It has to do with Shaul HaMelech. It has to do with the fact that Shaul was the first king of the Jewish people. As you know, after Moshe died, so then Yehoshua took over, and then there was a period of time called the Shoftim, which means that the judges were judging the Jewish people, but there was no king. And the first king, when the Jewish people asked Shmuel, who was the last of the judges, he was a prophet, they asked Shmuel to appoint a king for them. And Shmuel was told by Hashem that Shaul is the one who is best fit to be the king. And Shaul was selected as the king. And what had happened was, at a certain point in time, although Shaul was a very righteous man, which is why Hashem chose him, what had happened was that Shaul failed to carry out the order that Hashem told Shmuel to tell him, which is to erase Amalek, to wipe out the nation of Amalek. And instead of doing so, he left behind King Agag, and he left behind the sheep of Amalek, which he wasn't supposed to. because the people were saying that they want to take those sheep and offer them as sacrifices. It was a whole big to-do. And the point is that Shaul was told by Shmuel the prophet that you will be stripped of the kingdom. You will be stripped, and it'll be given to somebody else, and that someone else was King David. King David was told that he is the one who's going to be the king, and there was a very long period of time where people had no idea that King David was actually made into the king, and they still thought Shaul was the king. And there was this unfortunately, a spirit of kind of melancholy, or a spirit of craziness in a sense, came over Shaul. And Shaul tried to kill King David many, many times because he saw him as his competitor. David HaMelech wasn't even looking to be king, but Shmuel told him that he will be, and he anointed him as king. And Shaul was trying to kill David HaMelech time after time after time. There was a certain city that was helping David HaMelech, who was running away from Shaul, and he was hiding from Shaul, who was trying to kill him, and that was the city of Nov, the city of the Kohanim. And when there was this fellow Doega Edomi who had found out that David was there, he actually saw David there talking to the Kohanim there, and he went and he told Shaul, and Shaul went and killed out the entire city of Nov Ir Kohanim. He wiped out the whole place. So over here, at this point, Shmuel has obviously left Shaul, and Shaul is still trying to hold on to his kingdom. And outwardly, people are still saying that Shaul is the king, although it's David officially at this point. But the other nations still view Shaul as the king. And what happens is that Shaul is all alone. He doesn't have anybody to ask what to do. And there's this moment where the Plishtim, the army of the Plishtim coming out of Gaza, are now coming to attack the Jewish people. And Shaul fears for his life. He fears for the safety of the Jewish people as well. And he has nobody to turn to. He's got nothing, no one. And he finds himself with no other solution other than to go to one of the people that we're describing over here, the Ov or the Yidoni. And he, funnily enough, he actually made a tremendous campaign to get rid of the Ov and the Yidoni from the land. He is a very, very great tzaddik, and he wanted to make sure that these things were not observed, that nobody was doing this in the country, and he got rid of all of them. And now he finds himself looking for one of them, and there's only just one left in the country. And this woman was hiding, and she said, I don't want to do it, I don't want to help you, because Shaul hid himself. He was masking himself, covering himself, that nobody should know that it's him. And she said, Shaul he got rid of all of us, and I'm afraid to do it. He said to her, listen, don't worry, everything will be okay. Just do what I'm asking you to do. So now he goes ahead and he wants to talk to Shmuel, because Shmuel is the one who would guide him and would tell him everything to do. And he says, Shmuel, they're coming at me. The Plishtim are coming to me. Shmuel was very upset. Why are you disturbing my soul? I'm not supposed to be here. What are you doing? You did something terrible, etc. He chastises him for it. And then Shmuel says to him, listen, you asked it, you got it. Tomorrow, you're going to be here with me. Right? Imi, you're going to be with me tomorrow. In other words, this is your last day of life. If you want to know the truth, you're going to die. That's what he told him. And Shaul was very disturbed by this, right? And it was a big trouble, but surely enough, that's what ended up happening. The following day, they were attacked. Shaul fled, and it was just him and his armor bearer. And I'm just trying to make this as brief as I can. And eventually, he realized that if he doesn't take his own life, the Plishtim will take him, and they will torture him, and they will make a mockery out of him. So to save himself from having to go through that, he fell on his own sword, and he asked the other person to do it, and he wasn't willing to do it. He eventually fell on his own sword, and he killed himself. He died. Okay, very briefly, that's the story of how Shaul died. Now, says the Midrash when it says in the parasha, at the end of last week's parasha, V'ish o isha ki yeh b'hem ov, a man or a woman when there will be an ov, what is that? Who is the man we're talking about? Shaul. O isha, who is the woman we're talking about? The woman who was the ba'alat of, the woman who was doing this sorcery to speak with Shmuel. So what happens over here? What is the connection between this and the first pasuk of our parasha? So says the Midrash, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Emor el Kohanim. Hashem says to Moshe, tell the Kohanim. So says the Midrash, when Hashem taught the Torah to Moshe, Hashem showed him every generation. He showed him dor v'shoftav, every generation and its judges. Dor umlachav, every generation and its kings. Dor v'chachamav, every generation and its wise men. Dor manhigav, every generation and its leaders. And he showed him every generation and its prophets, etc., and even its thieves, it says. At this point, Moshe Rabbeinu looks at the story of Shaul, and he says, my goodness, Shaul was the first king of the Jewish people, and this is the death that he has to go through? He has to die on the sword? The first king? I mean, it's not, no king should have to do that, but the first one, especially a man that was as righteous as King Shaul. So at this point, Hashem responds to Moshe's question and says to him, Emor el ha-kohanim. He tells him, in a sense, what do you want from me? Emor el ha-kohanim. Talk to the Kohanim. Which Kohanim are we talking about? Says the Midrash, we're talking about the neshamot, the souls of the Kohanim that were killed by Shaul from the city of Nov. Because says the Midrash, those very Kohanim who were killed by Shaul are the Mekatregim. They are the ones in heaven who are the prosecuting attorneys against Shaul that are rooting for him to be killed by the sword, by the very same sword that he killed them with. In other words, that Shaul HaMelech should die a painful death because of what he did to them. That is what Hashem is telling Moshe. Okay, so that's the Midrash. That's our starting point for tonight. That's the starting point, to understand the connection between the end of last week's parasha and the beginning of this week's parasha. That there was a discussion about an Ov and a Yiduni because that's what Shaul HaMelech did. And Moshe saw Shaul's entire demise, his rise to power and his fall. He didn't like it. He said, Hashem, why should the first king die like that? And Hashem's response to Moshe was, don't talk to me. Emor la-Kohanim. Tell the Kohanim. Which Kohanim? The Kohanim from the city of Nov that Shaul killed because they were helping David to hide out and they gave them food. Okay. So now, over here, I would like to share with you first a thought about this Midrash that I saw from Rabbi Yisachar Friend in his book, which is a beautiful thought. And then I'd like to share with you a thought that I myself had about this as well. So let's start with Rabbi Friend and his beautiful thought. He brings down a sefer called Hadrash v'Ha'iyun, which is from the Reisha Rav. And he asks a question. He says the Mefarshim are bothered by a question about this Midrash. Why is it that this Midrash seems to be saying that the reason that Shaul was punished the way he was punished was because of the fact that he killed the city of Nov Ir Kohanim, that he wiped out the city of Kohanim called Nov? Didn't we learn already that the main reason that Shaul was stripped of his power was because of the fact that Shaul didn't listen to Shmuel's command, meaning what Hashem commanded him to do, that he's supposed to erase Amalek? I mean, think about the damage that did, right? For hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years at this point, we're suffering from Amalek, from the descendants of that one man, Agag, who managed to procreate that one night he stayed alive, and we have the descendants of him, Haman, and all these Imach Shemam people that tried to destroy Am Yisrael. They're from the offspring of Amalek. So look at how much suffering we. So that's the reason why he suffered the way he did, because he messed up so badly. I mean, it's true the city of Kohanim was bad, but the main issue was the fact that he let Amalek live. So why is this midrash that we have in the beginning of our parasha telling us that it had to do with the city of Nov Ir Kohanim? That is the question that the Reisha Rav is trying to answer. And he goes on to say something very interesting. He says, I want to explain to you what's going on here. It's a beautiful point that he makes. He says, of course, the main problem was the fact that Shaul let the legacy of Amalek live on. That is, of course, the main issue, without a doubt. And that's why he lost his kingdom, and that's why he had to die, unfortunately. But there could have been an argument that he would make that might have helped him. You see, if somebody is extremely passionate, I'd rather say compassionate, somebody is a very merciful person. He doesn't have it in him to kill a fly. He doesn't have it in him to kill an ant, let alone to kill a human being who seems helpless at this point. He lost his entire nation, country. What do I have to kill him for? If somebody has a very strong, merciful way of looking at things, he's very compassionate. So he could say to Hashem, look, Hashem, you gave me a very hard challenge. Don't punish me that bad. I am very compassionate. I am very, very merciful. I don't do things like this usually. It's very hard for me to do things like this. You want me to kill somebody who's helpless? I don't do stuff like that, Hashem. Very hard for me. So that wouldn't be a good excuse, but at least it would have some effect on his punishment, because after all, he is saying something. It was very hard for him. Okay. Problem is, says the Reisha Rav, so Moshe Rabbeinu is looking at this now and he's saying, Shaul was a very big person, a big tzaddik. So maybe he was very compassionate and it was hard for him. He should die by the sword. Says Hashem to Moshe, Emor la Kohanim. Talk to the Kohanim about his compassion, right? Talk to Nov, the city of the Kohanim, that because of his quote-unquote compassion, he managed to wipe out an entire city of Kohanim. For some reason, his quote-unquote compassion didn't make it over there, because he was afraid of losing his kingdom to David HaMelech, and he said, you're helping my enemy, I'm going to wipe each and every one of you out so that everyone hears and learns their lesson never to do anything like that again. For some reason, compassion over there didn't play an element. So the point that's being made by this midrash is rather not that the main reason for his punishment was because of the city of Kohanim. No, it's because initially he failed to follow out the mitzvah of Hashem to wipe out Amalek. That's the reason. But the argument that could have been made that he's a very compassionate person, and that's the reason why he didn't kill Agag, and that's the reason for his failure, because he was overwhelmed with his mercy. That argument is dead on arrival because of the fact that when it came to the city of Nov, the Kohanim, Shaul had no compassion. He had no mercy. And over here says Rabbi Friend a very, very powerful point. He says, we also have this problem. We also, after 120, are going to be asked questions. Hopefully the answers to the questions will all be positive, that we were successful and we were accomplished in our Torah and our Yiddishkeit, in our spirituality. Hopefully we will have that ability to say that. But for the people that don't, and they're asked, they say, Hashem will say to the person, okay, so here I have that, Baruch Hashem, you have a bank account with $500 million, Baruch Hashem, excellent. So where's the maaser, right? So the guy says, well, I mean, there are lots of expenses, business expenses, these types of expenses, and this and that, and he starts giving excuses, right? So, the person could say, Hashem, don't be upset at me. I really did have a lot of expenses. It's not easy to run such a company. It's not easy to do this. It's not easy to do that, etc. And he gives a lot of excuses. Then Hashem says, yeah, okay, fine. So if you would be consistent, and then when it comes to your vacations and your spending and your nightly dining at here and whining and dining here and there and everywhere, and a month and a half in Turks and Caicos and a month and a half over here and there. So if that would have been consistent, then you would have had maybe something of an argument to say, look, the expenses are very high, etc., whatever. But being that the rest of the lifestyle didn't match that argument, so that argument holds no water. That's what he's saying about Shaul. Shaul, you want to tell me that you were very compassionate? What happened to Novi Kohanim? Right? That's a very powerful point. We all have, a person says, Hashem is going to ask the guy, okay, so do you know the Torah? Can you tell me Bereshit? Can you tell me Shemot? Vayikra, Bamidbar, Dvarim. Can you tell me the Tanakh? No? Okay, what about some Gemara? A little Gemara, a little bit of something? Can you tell me? No. Why? I had no time, Hashem. I had no time. I'd go to work from morning till night. I'd barely see my kid. I just didn't have the time. Hashem, what do you want from me? So, okay, valid. But let's see. But for TV, for some reason, plenty of time. For sports, plenty of time. For friends and get together, plenty of time. But for learning, not so much time. So in other words, the argument, if it's going to have any kind of effect, has to be consistent through and through. He doesn't have time for learning, but he doesn't have time for anything else either. He's really, really, really busy through and through. Okay, makes sense. So that argument is dead on arrival if it's known that unfortunately for the other things he did have a lot of time. So that is a beautiful point from Rabbi Friend, which I think it was very worthwhile to share. Now, I want to talk about this midrash from a different perspective. I want to talk about that last point about this midrash, which is that Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu something very interesting. Hashem is telling Moshe, you are asking me, why is Shaul dying by the sword? He is the first king of the Jewish people. So Emor Kohanim, tell that to the Kohanim. They are the ones who are his prosecuting attorneys, the ones that he killed. They're in Shemaim and they're saying, Hashem, you have to kill him by the sword too. Did you see what he did to us? You have to kill him by the sword. He has to die. He can't get away with what he did, right? So, Emor Kohanim, Moshe, tell the Kohanim. So what we see from here is that the fight that's going on in Shemaim, right, that this should take place, is from the victim of the crime, right, the victim who are the Kohanim. To me, this is very reminiscent of one other case. The first case I think we ever saw this in the Torah is the story of Cain and Hevel. And Hashem says to Cain, where is Hevel, your brother? Cain says, am I my brother's keeper? And then Hashem says to Cain, what did you do? The voice of the blood of your brother is screaming out to me from the earth. In other words, I know exactly what happened, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to say that you sinned. But over here, the point is that the victim, Hevel, is screaming out from the ground, from the earth. His neshama is crying to Hashem, Hashem, look what Cain did to me, right? The same exact idea. Abotai, I had a thought. I had a question over here. Very uncharacteristic of Moshe Rabbeinu to not put up a fight. We know that when Moshe Rabbeinu heard that the Jewish people are going to get wiped out, what did Moshe do? He got up and he said, Hashem, I'm not letting you do this. If you want to wipe out the Jewish people, erase me from the book that you have written. Erase me. If you want to harm the Jews, then harm me too, because I'm not going to be a leader of some other nation. I'm the leader of the Jewish people, and it's either both of us or none of us. So Moshe Rabbeinu knows how to put up a fight. I had a question on this Midrash, Abotai. Why didn't Moshe Rabbeinu fight? Hashem tells Moshe, why are you talking to me about how Shaul is going to die? Talk to the Kohanim that were killed by Shaul. Their neshama is going to be the prosecuting attorney against Shaul. And because of what they're saying, he's going to die by the sword. Question, Moshe Rabbeinu, you hear what you hear what Hashem is saying. Hashem is telling you, Emor LaKohanim, you want to pick up a fight with them and argue with them and be a defense attorney for Shaul? Go for it. Did he? I don't think he did. We don't see that he did put up a fight for Shaul, and Shaul ended up dying by the sword, exactly according to the prosecution of those people. Why didn't he fight? I had a thought, and the thought is as follows. Rabbeinu Ha'ari HaKadosh tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu was a Gilgul. He was a reincarnation of someone. Whose reincarnation was he? Hevel. He was the reincarnation of Hevel. And we know that Hevel was a victim. Hevel was the first victim of murder that ever lived. It's very possible that if Hevel knows what it means to scream out from the ground as a victim and to want to see the punishment of the person that did this to you, maybe it's possible that he understood for that reason that if this is what he did to Novi or Kohanim, I'm not going to go ahead and to fight for his easier death. Just the thought that I had, because he himself was Hevel, so he knew what that was like. He understood the pain that's involved, and he understood why they were doing what they were doing, prosecuting Shaul in Shamayim for what he did. So I want to share with you just what we see from this whole discussion is that the thought that when you victimize a neshama, God forbid, that neshama is not happy in Shamayim with you. And when you benefit a neshama, when you do good for the neshama, that neshama is very happy with you and wants to see your success and wants to pray for you and wants you to do good. And I'm going to share with you now two stories that show both of these things. That show that the idea that a neshama that is suffering because of a person is not happy with that person. And that a neshama that is benefiting because of that person is very happy, and it will help that person in Shamayim, praying for him that he should succeed. So let's start with the first one. The first story here is about none other than the great Rebbetzin, Aleh Shalom, Rebbetzin Batsheva Kanievsky. Over here, the story comes from a book that's called Or Halacha in Taharat HaMishpacha. A very interesting book, goes through lots of halachot and lots of ideas in hashkafa about marriage and shlom bayit. And he says over the following story. There was a woman that she and her husband were a wonderful, observant couple living in Israel. And what had happened was that, Baruch Hashem, she had gotten pregnant and they had her first child. And she was ecstatic and thrilled. And they were very close to the Kanievskis, and they would always go and they would talk to them and they would get their blessing for different things. And this woman, she got pregnant 6 months after her first baby. And the doctors told her that her pregnancy is extremely dangerous for a certain reason, one reason or another. And it's something that will risk her life. In other words, if she continues to allow this pregnancy to continue, she will be risking her life. If she goes through a surgery of some sort, it could be possible that she's going to die from this surgery. It was a very complicated pregnancy for whatever the reason was, and therefore she had no choice but to save her own life, which the halacha says, "En dochim nefesh b'pnei nefesh." The baby that's going to kill the mother has the status of a rodef. according to halacha, and therefore it was almost certain that she would die, and therefore they had no choice but to save her life. Now, the words of that doctor, the doctor who told her that if she gets pregnant, she might die, those words were so, rather that pregnancy rather might have killed her. Those words were so powerful to this woman that she was terrified of becoming pregnant, absolutely terrified. Now, she didn't have a problem to become pregnant. All the doctors told her that she has no issues. But for so many years, for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, she then again, the husband and she were trying to get pregnant, and she wasn't doing anything to prevent it, but she simply wasn't able to become pregnant. And they would continue going to Rav Chaim Kanievsky and to Rebbetzin Bat Sheva, and she would always hear her plea, and nothing helped. Nothing helped. Until eventually somebody explained to her, look, you have a problem in your head. You're terrified of getting pregnant because of what happened to you originally with your second child, with your second pregnancy, rather. You're so scared of your own death. You're so scared of dying that your mind is not allowing your body to become pregnant. And the husband was silent. He wasn't complaining. He was living together, but he was devastated because his brothers were getting married and their families were growing, and his family was still just his wife and his child. That was it. And he was devastated. He wanted his family to grow as well. So he is now in this situation, and he says, you know what? Let's go to the Rebbetzin Bat Sheva one more time. And he goes to her with his wife, and he says, I'm suffering. I don't know what to do. All the doctors are telling us that my wife has no problem to get pregnant, and that the only reason that she's not able to and hasn't been able to for the last 8.5 years is due to the fact that she's very scared of becoming pregnant. Her mind is simply not allowing her body to become pregnant because of the fact that she's terrified from her last experience. Now, she says, every single time that she went to Rebbetzin Bat Sheva, the Rebbetzin was so nice and so warm, and she could testify that she saw hundreds of women going to her, and even if they weren't observant, she would be very warm to them, very kind, very loving. To be honest with you, I myself could testify to that as well. I myself was there, even with somebody who was a non-observant woman who didn't dress the way that they dressed in Bnei Brak, and still she was praising her that she was the nicest and sweetest lady to her. And it was famous that that's how she did things. Now, she came and she's talking to this husband and wife, and she's listening to their story. And she tells her, listen, I have to discuss this with my husband. Tomorrow, I want you to come back here by yourself. She says, no problem. Following day, this woman goes back to Rebbetzin Bat Sheva, and she starts to talk to her. And she says to her, let me tell you a mashal. Let me give you a mashal. What would you say to, God forbid, as we know in Israel, there are lots of sirens going off because bombs are coming all the time. She says to her, what would you say to a woman who has she hears a siren, and that means that there's a bomb on the way, there's a rocket being launched at them? What would you say to this woman if, let's say, she's running for her life, but there are people that are able to pinpoint exactly where the bomb is going to land, and they are watching her and they see that she is running away from the bomb, actually running right to the location where the bomb is going to drop, right? So would you say that it's not fair to go and to take her away from where she's running to? Would you say that, hey, it's not okay, you're scaring her, you're scaring this, if you don't let her run, then you're going to be terrified. She's going to be terrified. She's running for her life. She's so scared. and you can't go and stand in her way because she's in a state of a frenzy. So the lady said back to her, that's not the right way to do things. If she's going to hurt herself, if she's going to damage herself, she's going to die from this bomb, then you have to pull her away from it, right? Because she's going to do harm to herself. So Rebbetzin said, oh, okay. So in other words, you're telling me that if a person is doing harm to themselves, then to the fact that they're afraid and that's the reason that they're doing harm to themselves, so then that's not enough of a reason not to pull them away from the bad thing that they're doing to themselves, correct? So she said, correct. Okay. So all of a sudden it says that Rebbetzin Bat Sheva looked at this lady and she gave her a stare of anger. Now, it's obviously outward anger because you're not allowed to get angry, but she looked at her with this fierce eyes. And I'm going to read to you the words inside so you understand exactly what she said. She says to this woman, Takshivi tov. She says, listen carefully. Bashamayim mamtinot neshamot. In the heavens, there are souls that are waiting. That you are supposed to bring into this world. And their frustration with you is very great and very scary. Much more than the words of that doctor who scared you about your pregnancy. הנשמות האלו מקפידות עלייך וטובות סביבך רשת של מלאכים רעים שירדפו אותך בחייך. She says to her, those souls are now putting together a force against you of angels that are going to chase you for the rest of your life. Negative angels. וגם לאחר פטירתך, even after you die. ההשלכות האלו איומות ונוראות. She told her that the ramifications of this are terrifying and scary. ואינן מתחשבות כלל בכך שאת פוחדת ממשהו. And they could care less that the reason that you're doing this to them is because of the fact that you're scared of something that a doctor told you a few years ago. So she heard that, and all of a sudden she got terrified. She said, oh my gosh, really? That's much worse than what the doctor told me. Immediately thereafter, she left her fear and she ran and she got pregnant right away. 9 months later, she had her first child after 8.5 years. And then she subsequently had another 3 more children, totaling 5 kids to this beautiful family now. But the message that Rebbetzin Bat Sheva, and apparently she said she spoke to her husband about it, she got from her husband, Reb Chaim, was the message that your fear is in the wrong place. You're afraid of something the doctor told you, and it might have some kind of an effect, and it might not. Who knows? It could be totally off. As a matter of fact, you're telling me you went to all these doctors, and they're telling you that you have no problem getting pregnant. It's just the fear from the old guy that gave you something in the past. He gave you some kind of fear in the past that you're not letting go of. She said, here's what you should really be afraid of. There are neshamot that are supposed to be born to you and your husband. You got married with the intention of having children. There are souls that are lined up to come out of you and your husband. And you're not letting them do their job. You're not letting them come into the world to fulfill their mission. So they're stuck up there and they have no way of coming down. Do you understand how upset they are at you? Do you understand what it is that you're doing? Abotai, that's the kind of conversation I think would scare any one of us. It's a very scary thought. We don't think of it that way, but that's what's going on, which is a scary, scary thought. And obviously, now don't get the wrong idea, Abotai. I'm not telling you that nobody should ever try and limit the amount of children that they have. Every situation is different. Every case is different. And it needs to be consulted with an authority. And you have to take care and think about each situation on its own basis, what the woman can handle, cannot handle, etc. There are different situations, different scenarios. But the concept that I'm trying to bring in over here is the concept that when you harm a neshama, when you do damage to a neshama, there's a neshama that wants to come and do something, to come into this world and bring Kedusha into this world, and you are the reason that it cannot do that, that's a big problem. It's a big problem for you. And the words that came out of the Rebbitzin's mouth, which she never says to anybody, which, by the way, the lady said, the Rebbitzin many months later said, listen, that time that I was very harsh with you, I'm sorry about it. She said, you don't understand what you did for me. You've totally relieved me of my problem. You say that harshness was the biggest chesed that could ever happen. So, but the point that she made was very powerful. And now I'm going to share with you a story that goes in the total opposite direction, which is also equally unbelievable. It says in the biography of Chacham Ovadia Yosef, it's in English, it's called Maran. It's on page 488, if you want to look it up. There was a fellow, and they say that they changed the name, but they call him Mr. Friedman. This was a fellow that was from New York. Well, originally he was a Holocaust survivor, but he, at his later stage in his life, moved to New York. And he had a family, and he had sons-in-laws and grandchildren. And he was on a trip. He decided he wants to go to Israel to visit the Gedolim, to visit the great tzaddikim. And he decided that he wants to go with his son-in-law. His son-in-law said, I want to come with you. And he said, sure. And one of their stops that they came to was none other than the great Chacham Ovadia Yosef, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. His son-in-law was Syrian. So he was, I guess that was one of the great rabbis on the itinerary. So he said, sure, and they went to meet him. So they come into his room. They come into the room of the rabbi, alav shalom. And the rabbi immediately looks at this Mr. Friedman, and he says to him, why do you smell like Gan Eden? Why do you have a scent of the Garden of Eden? Why? So Mr. Friedman is kind of surprised, and he's kind of stunned. So Chacham Ovadia says, I want to know. So Mr. Friedman says, well, Baruch Hashem, over the years I've been able to put together some money, and I have, Baruch Hashem, sons-in-law and sons that are learning Torah all day long. I support them. I pay for what they need so that they can sit and learn. Chacham Ovadia looks at him and he says, that's not it. There are a lot of people that do that. It's a lovely thing, but that's not why they don't have the same scent of Gan Eden that you do. So he says, okay, no problem. There were other mitzvot. He says, there must be some other mitzvot that you did. So he said, well, I'll tell you, when I was after the Holocaust, my father and I, we were in Siberia, and we had heard after the war that the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, we had heard such an accusation that they had taken the dead bodies and the ashes of those dead bodies of Jews, and they turned them into soap bars. And they were selling soap throughout Europe from the bodies of dead Jews. Yimach Shemam v'zichram. So that's what we heard, he told him. And when we heard that information, my father told me, let's go out to Poland and let's go around to all the places where the Nazis were selling soap. We'll buy the soap and we'll bury it. So that's what they did. They went around and they were traveling all throughout Poland, and they were buying up all the soap that they could find. They asked where the Nazis sold, so they bought up every last bar that they could find. And then came time, eventually they buried it, and came time to go back to Siberia to reunite with the rest of their family and then move on with life. So what happened was, there was one moment where the father was away from him for just a few minutes, and he was out in the street, and some Polish guy approached this Mr. Friedman, and he told him, look, I've got a big box of soap that I bought from the Nazis. He says, really? Yeah. So he says, look, how much do you want for it? So the guy said some crazy number. It was way too much. And the guy Mr. Friedman didn't have any money on him. He said, look, it's a lot of money. I can't give that to you. He says, why don't you give me the soap now and then I'll pay you later? He says, no, I don't want it. I don't want to do that. I want the money up front. So he realizes this is the last opportunity he's got to get this soap and bury it. So I'm sorry. So before I continue this story, Mechila, I forgot to mention that at this point in the story, he told everybody in the room that he would just like to be alone with Chacham Ovadia and the translator. So everybody at this point had to leave the room because he didn't want to continue with everyone there. So he then proceeds to tell Chacham Ovadia that what happened with this case was he told the guy, look, I don't have any money and my father is not anywhere nearby, but I do see something I can offer you. He says, I'm looking at your pants. Your pants are cotton. He says, look at my pants. My pants are wool. I'm willing to trade my wool pants that are excellent for the winter if you give me your cotton pants and you give me the big box of soap. He said, you have a deal. And they traded pants. Now, that was a commodity back then because wool pants in Europe in freezing winter it's very important. And he was going to none other than Siberia. He was on the way back to Siberia. You understand how cold that is. And he doesn't even have wool pants anymore, the one thing that he could really use. But he said, it's worth it if I'm burying the neshamot of Jews who were killed al Kiddush Hashem. So at this point, Chacham Ovadia turned to this Mr. Friedman and he told him, now I understand why you have the scent of Gan Eden. You see, the souls of those tzaddikim that died, anybody who died al Kiddush Hashem has the automatic status of a tzaddik. He says, you took the souls of tzaddikim and you buried them in the ground and you gave them their final resting. And those souls have been with you ever since that day. They have been accompanying you and they have been praying for you and they have been rooting for you and they have been asking Hashem to bless you, which you've been blessed. Because ever since then, those neshamot that made their way finally to Gan Eden, because of what you did, were at your side, trying to help you and trying to pray for your success. That's why you have the scent of Gan Eden. Fast forward a few years, Mr. Friedman passed away. The translator that was there to translate between Chacham Ovadia and Mr. Friedman had since moved to New York, and he heard that Mr. Friedman had died. He then goes on to tell the sons, he says, I heard a lot of things, amazing things about your father. And when he was by Chacham Ovadia, the story with the soap was amazing. But I mean, when I heard the story about the pants, that was wild. Now they said, what story about the pants? He said, what do you mean? He never told you? What do you mean? What are you talking about? And he realized that this Mr. Friedman was so humble. He never even wanted to share this with the family. That's why he asked everyone to leave. He didn't want them to hear this story about how he gave his wool pants in order to receive this big box of soap in the freezing winter in Europe. So we see as well that when a person does something for the sake of benefiting the neshamot of those that were deceased, and he does benefit them, so that's something which goes a very long way, and they pray for that person, they root for that person, they're by his side to help. Instead of there being prosecuting attorneys like the Kohanim against Shaul, or like Hevel against Cain, or like those neshamot that are staring at this mom who is refusing to allow herself to become pregnant, God forbid, and she was able to, and her husband wanted that originally, and so did she. So instead of that, God forbid, we have the opportunity as well to have neshamot praying for us, rooting for us, cheering for us, helping us, asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to do good things for us because of the fact that we did for their neshamot good things. And that's why it's so important when a son has the ability to say Kaddish for a father, has the ability to learn Torah for a parent, or for anyone, a grandparent, for anyone who is deceased, to elevate their soul. It's so important. As a matter of fact, for anybody to elevate their neshamot, that is a very, very powerful thing that benefits everybody. And I think that's something that we can all try to do and try to make an effort, and that will benefit us all as well. Okay, everybody, I think I'm done for tonight. Thank you for joining me. Tizku mitzvot. Looking forward to learning again with you next week. B'atzlacha.
Thank you.